Have you ever felt your heart racing, your thoughts spiraling out of control, your chest tightening as if something terrible is about to happen, even when you know rationally that you're safe? You're not alone. Anxiety disorders affect over 300 million people worldwide, making them the most common mental health condition on the planet. For decades, Western medicine approached anxiety primarily through pharmaceutical interventions and talk therapy. Then in the 1970s, a cardiologist from Harvard Medical School named Herbert Benson traveled to the Himalayan mountains to study Tibetan Buddhist monks. What he discovered would revolutionize our understanding of anxiety and stress. The monks practiced a systematic approach to calming the nervous system that produced measurable physiological changes opposite to the stress response. Benson called it the relaxation response, but what he was actually documenting was a sophisticated 6-step practice refined over 3,000 years of contemplative tradition. If you're struggling with anxiety and searching for a scientifically validated method rooted in ancient wisdom that doesn't require medication, subscribe now and activate notifications. You're about to learn the exact 6-step Tibetan practice that Harvard researchers studied, how it rewires your nervous system, and why it might be more effective than anything you've tried before. Before we continue, we want to be completely transparent with you. This video is produced with the assistance of artificial intelligence for narration and visual generation. However, every piece of research, every explanation of Tibetan Buddhist practices, every interpretation of scientific studies and practical application presented here comes from 100% human curation, investigation, and intellectual work. We believe in combining the efficiency of technology with the irreplaceable depth of human scholarship to bring you the most accurate and meaningful content about Tibetan Buddhism. The story begins in 1967 when Herbert Benson, a young cardiologist at Harvard Medical School, was studying high blood pressure. Practitioners of transcendental meditation approached him claiming they could voluntarily lower their blood pressure and heart rate through mental techniques alone. Benson was skeptical. Medical orthodoxy held that the autonomic nervous system, which controls blood pressure, heart rate, metabolism, and other vital functions, operated automatically and beyond conscious control. The idea that someone could willfully modulate these processes seemed impossible. But when Benson tested the meditators, he discovered they were right. During meditation, oxygen consumption dropped by 17%, far more than during sleep. Heart rate slowed by 3 beats per minute on average. Alpha brainwaves associated with relaxed alertness increased significantly. Blood pressure decreased in hypertensive individuals. The meditators were consciously activating what Benson termed the relaxation response, a physiological state opposite to the fight or flight stress response. Intrigued, Benson traveled to the Himalayas in 1981 to study advanced Tibetan Buddhist practitioners. What he witnessed defied everything he thought possible about human physiology. Monks practicing Jitamo meditation, a specific Tibetan technique, raised their peripheral body temperature by 16 to 17 degrees Fahrenheit through nothing but visualization and breathing. They sat in rooms barely above freezing wearing only thin robes while researchers watched their skin temperature climb dramatically. Wet sheets placed on their bodies dried completely from the internally generated heat. This wasn't just the relaxation response. This was conscious control of the autonomic nervous system at a level Western medicine had never documented. Benson spent decades studying these practices, eventually establishing the Benson Henry Institute for Mind-Body Medicine at Massachusetts General Hospital. His research demonstrated that the relaxation response could treat anxiety, mild to moderate depression, high blood pressure, heartbeat irregularities, excessive anger, insomnia, and numerous other stress-exacerbated conditions. The key was understanding that these Tibetan practices weren't mystical or supernatural. They were systematic methods for activating specific neurophysiological mechanisms that everyone possesses, but most people never learn to control. What exactly is anxiety from the Tibetan Buddhist perspective? Modern psychology defines anxiety as excessive fear and worry that persists even in the absence of real threat. It manifests as racing thoughts, physical tension, hypervigilance, avoidance behaviors, and a sense of dread about future events. Neuroscience reveals that anxiety involves hyperactivity in the amygdala, the brain's fear center, combined with insufficient regulation from the prefrontal cortex. The sympathetic nervous system remains chronically activated, keeping your body in constant fight or flight readiness. Stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline circulate at elevated levels, creating the physical symptoms of anxiety, including rapid heartbeat, shallow breathing, muscle tension, and digestive disturbances. Tibetan Buddhism would say that all of this is accurate but incomplete. Anxiety isn't just a neurological malfunction. It's a manifestation of fundamental ignorance about the nature of mind and reality, specifically the misperception that you are a solid, separate self that needs constant protection from a threatening world. The anxiety you experience arises from clinging to what you want and aversion to what you fear, both rooted in the illusion that phenomena have independent, permanent existence. Your thoughts about the future, which generate anxiety, are mistaken for reality rather than recognized as impermanent mental events with no more substance than dreams. If these insights are already shifting your understanding of what anxiety actually is, take a moment to like this video. Your engagement helps us reach others who are trapped in anxiety and don't know that a path to freedom exists. This brings us to the 6-step practice that synthesizes Tibetan Buddhist wisdom with the scientific framework validated by Harvard research. These steps represent the core sequence found in traditional shamatha and vipassana meditation practices, specifically adapted for working with anxiety and refined through 3 millennia of contemplative investigation. Modern practitioners like Tara Brach have created acronyms like RAIN to make these steps accessible, but the underlying process is ancient. The 6 steps are recognize, release, relax, redirect, rest, and return. Let me walk you through each step in detail, explaining both the traditional understanding and what modern neuroscience reveals about why it works. Step 1 is recognize. The first and most crucial step when anxiety arises is simply to recognize that it's happening. This sounds obvious, but most people spend years lost in anxiety without ever clearly recognizing it as a mental and physical process, distinct from reality. You become so identified with the anxious thoughts and sensations that you can't separate your awareness from the anxiety itself. Recognition requires a momentary pause, a stepping back from the rushing river of anxious experience to see it from the bank rather than being swept downstream. In traditional Tibetan practice, this is called mindfulness or present moment awareness. You name what's happening. I am experiencing anxiety. My chest is tight, my thoughts are racing about the future. You're not trying to change anything yet. You're simply illuminating what was previously unconscious. Neuroscience reveals that this simple act of recognition activates the prefrontal cortex, the brain region responsible for observing and regulating emotion. Research using fMRI scans shows that when people name their emotions, even with a single word, activity in the amygdala decreases, while activity in the prefrontal cortex increases. By recognizing and naming your anxiety, you're already beginning to create space between your awareness and the anxious experience, diminishing its power over you. Step 2 is release. Once you've recognized the anxiety, the next step is to release your grip on it. This doesn't mean making it go away or suppressing it. Release means letting go of your struggle against the anxiety, your resistance to it being present, your desperate attempt to fix or eliminate it immediately. Anxiety persists and intensifies largely because we fight against it. We tense up against the uncomfortable sensations. We try to push away the frightening thoughts. We tell ourselves we shouldn't be feeling this way. All of that resistance creates what's called the second arrow of suffering. The first arrow is the anxiety itself. The second arrow is the suffering we add by resisting the first arrow, by judging ourselves for feeling anxious, by catastrophizing about what the anxiety means. The Tibetan understanding is that we're constantly grasping at pleasant experiences and pushing away unpleasant ones. This grasping and aversion is the fundamental mechanism creating suffering. When anxiety arises, we immediately try to grasp at calmness and push the anxiety away. That pushing, that resistance, tightens the knot of suffering. Release means opening your hand and letting the anxiety be present without fighting it. It's a radical act of acceptance that paradoxically creates the conditions for the anxiety to naturally dissolve. Research on acceptance and commitment therapy demonstrates that experiential avoidance, the attempt to escape uncomfortable internal experiences, is a primary cause of psychological suffering. Studies show that people who practice acceptance of difficult emotions rather than avoidance experience reduced anxiety symptoms, greater psychological flexibility, and improved quality of life. Step 3 is relax. After recognizing the anxiety and releasing your resistance to it, you actively relax the physical tension that anxiety creates in your body. Anxiety manifests as constriction. Your muscles tense, particularly in the chest, shoulders, neck, and jaw. Your breathing becomes shallow and rapid. This physical tension sends feedback signals to your brain confirming that there's danger, which perpetuates the anxiety cycle. The relaxation step consciously interrupts that cycle by systematically releasing physical tension. In traditional Tibetan practice, this often includes focusing on the breath, allowing it to deepen and slow naturally. You might scan through your body, noticing areas of tightness and consciously softening them. You relax your forehead, your jaw, your shoulders, your belly. You might gently smile, which activates the parasympathetic nervous system and sends signals of safety to your brain. This is the core of what Herbert Benson documented as the relaxation response. By consciously relaxing the body, you activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which governs rest and recovery functions. Heart rate slows, blood pressure drops, breathing deepens, stress hormone production decreases, and the activation of the amygdala diminishes. Research on progressive muscle relaxation consistently shows significant reductions in anxiety symptoms. Studies demonstrate decreased cortisol levels, reduced subjective anxiety, and measurable changes in brainwave patterns showing increased alpha activity. The beauty of this step is that it's entirely under your conscious control. You can't directly control your amygdala or stress hormones, but you can control your muscles and breathing, and through them you indirectly modulate the entire stress response system. Share this video with anyone struggling with anxiety who feels helpless against their symptoms. Understanding that you can intervene in the anxiety cycle through these systematic steps offers genuine hope and practical tools for transformation. Step 4 is redirect. After relaxing the physical tension, you redirect your attention to a neutral or positive object rather than continuing to engage with anxious thoughts about the future. In traditional Tibetan meditation, this object is often the breath, specifically the sensation of breathing at the nostrils or the rising and falling of the abdomen. The breath serves as an anchor, a reference point that's always available in the present moment. Anxiety exists entirely in thoughts about the future, catastrophic scenarios that haven't happened and likely never will. When you redirect attention to the breath, you're interrupting the anxious thought stream and bringing awareness back to present moment sensory experience. You're not suppressing the thoughts. You're simply choosing to place attention elsewhere, specifically on something that's happening right now, rather than imagined futures. This practice trains the attentional networks in your brain, strengthening your capacity to choose where you focus rather than being at the mercy of whatever thought arises most loudly. Neuroscience research on attention training through meditation shows remarkable results. Studies by Richard Davidson and others demonstrate that even brief meditation practice increases activity in brain regions associated with attention control. Long-term meditators show enhanced ability to sustain attention, resist distraction, and detect subtle signals that non-meditators miss. Research specifically on anxiety shows that attention training reduces rumination, the repetitive negative thinking that maintains and intensifies anxiety. By strengthening your capacity to redirect attention from anxious thoughts to present moment experience, you're developing a skill that becomes more powerful with practice. Step 5 is rest. After redirecting attention, you rest in present moment awareness without doing anything further. This might seem like the easiest step, but for most people it's actually the most challenging. We're conditioned to constantly do something, to fix problems, to achieve outcomes. The idea of simply resting, of being present without agenda or goal, feels uncomfortable. But this resting is where the deepest transformation occurs. In Tibetan Buddhist terms, you're resting in the natural state of mind, which is inherently peaceful, spacious, and clear when not disturbed by grasping, aversion, and conceptual elaboration. The anxiety you experience is not your fundamental nature. It's a temporary disturbance, like clouds obscuring the sky. The sky itself, the awareness in which anxiety arises, remains undisturbed. When you rest in awareness itself rather than identified with the content of awareness, you discover a dimension of your experience that anxiety can't touch. Even brief moments of resting in spacious awareness create profound shifts. Neuroscience research on the default mode network provides fascinating insights. The default mode network is active when your mind is wandering, particularly when you're thinking about yourself, your past, your future, and your relationships. Hyperactivity in this network is associated with depression, anxiety, and rumination. Experienced meditators show decreased activity in the default mode network during meditation, particularly in regions associated with self-referential thinking. When you rest in awareness, you're quieting the neural networks that generate the sense of a threatened self that needs to constantly monitor for danger. Step 6 is return. Inevitably, your mind will wander from resting in present awareness back into anxious thoughts. This is completely normal and not a failure. The 6th step is simply to return, to begin the cycle again. You recognize that your attention has been captured by anxious thoughts. You release your grip on those thoughts. You relax the physical tension. You redirect your attention to the breath. You rest again in present awareness. And when attention wanders again, you return again. This return is where the real practice lives. You'll return hundreds of times in a single meditation session, thousands of times over weeks of practice. Each return strengthens the neural pathways supporting attention regulation, emotional control, and present moment awareness. Each return weakens the habitual patterns of anxious thinking. Traditional teachings emphasize that the return should be gentle, even joyful. You're not failing when your mind wanders. You're succeeding every time you notice the wandering and choose to return. Research on neuroplasticity reveals that this repeated practice of returning creates measurable structural changes in the brain. Studies comparing experienced meditators to non-meditators show increased gray matter density in brain regions associated with attention, emotional regulation, and perspective taking. These changes correlate with reduced anxiety, improved mood, and greater psychological resilience. If you haven't subscribed yet, click now to join a community learning these profound practices that combine ancient wisdom with modern scientific validation. You can practice formally by setting aside 10 to 20 minutes to sit quietly and work systematically through the steps. When anxiety arises during formal meditation, you immediately apply the 6-step sequence. With repeated formal practice, the sequence becomes increasingly natural and automatic. But the power of this practice is that it's also applicable in daily life. When anxiety strikes during a work meeting, while driving in a social situation, or lying awake at night, you can apply an abbreviated version in real time. Recognize, oh, this is anxiety arising. Release, I'm not going to fight this. Relax. Soften my shoulders and deepen my breath. Redirect. Bring attention to the present moment. Rest. Be here without needing to fix anything. Return. Gently come back when attention strays. With practice, this entire cycle can happen in 30 seconds or less, providing immediate relief from acute anxiety, while simultaneously training your nervous system. Research specifically validating this approach is extensive. Herbert Benson's studies at Harvard demonstrated that regular practice of the relaxation response significantly reduced anxiety symptoms in clinical populations. A meta-analysis of 47 studies examining meditation for anxiety disorders found moderate to large effect sizes for symptom reduction, comparable to pharmaceutical interventions but without side effects. Research on mindfulness-based stress reduction consistently shows 30 to 40% reductions in anxiety symptoms that persist at follow-up months and even years later. Neuroscience research reveals the mechanisms. Regular practice increases activity and connectivity in prefrontal regions that regulate emotion, while decreasing reactivity in the amygdala. It shifts the balance of the autonomic nervous system toward parasympathetic dominance. It alters neurotransmitter levels, increasing GABA, which has anxiolytic effects, and modulating serotonin and dopamine, Research on heart rate variability shows consistent improvements in meditators. Higher heart rate variability correlates with better ability to handle stress and lower anxiety. What makes this practice particularly powerful is that it addresses anxiety at multiple levels simultaneously. At the physiological level, the relaxation step directly counteracts the stress response. At the cognitive level, the recognize and redirect steps interrupt anxious thought patterns and train attentional control. At the behavioral level, the release step eliminates experiential avoidance that paradoxically intensifies anxiety. At the existential level, the rest step offers glimpses of a dimension of awareness that isn't defined by or threatened by anxiety. This multi-level intervention is why contemplative practices often succeed where other approaches have failed. Let me address some common challenges. First, this practice is not about eliminating anxiety entirely. Anxiety is a normal human emotion that serves important evolutionary functions. The goal is to change your relationship with it, so that anxiety no longer controls your life. You learn to experience anxiety without being consumed by it, to observe anxious thoughts without believing they're reality. Second, this practice requires consistency. You won't master the steps in a week. Research shows measurable improvements after 8 weeks of daily practice. Third, working with severe anxiety often requires additional support. These practices are effective and scientifically validated, but they're not a substitute for professional mental health care when needed. If your anxiety is severe or interfering significantly with daily functioning, please seek support from a qualified professional. Fourth, you might experience temporary increases in anxiety when you begin practicing. As you develop mindfulness, you become more sensitive to sensations previously below conscious awareness. This initial increase typically resolves within weeks as your capacity strengthens. What part of the 6-step practice resonates most with you? Have you already experienced any of these steps naturally when dealing with anxiety? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments. The profound teaching underlying this practice is that anxiety is not your enemy. It's a messenger, an opportunity to develop wisdom and compassion. Every moment of anxiety you work with using the 6 steps is training, strengthening your capacity to be present with difficulty without being overwhelmed. This willingness to meet anxiety with recognition rather than avoidance, with release rather than resistance, is the essence of courage. It's also what Tibetan Buddhism calls bodhicitta, the awakened heart that doesn't turn away from suffering, but learns to transform it through compassionate awareness. The monks Herbert Benson studied weren't superhuman. They were ordinary people who had trained their minds systematically. The neuroplasticity that allowed them to consciously control their autonomic nervous systems exists in your brain right now. You have the capacity to transform your relationship with anxiety. All that's required is practice, patience, and willingness to meet your experience with gentle, persistent attention. Thank you for exploring this profound practice with us. May these 6 steps support your journey toward freedom from anxiety and the discovery of the peaceful, spacious awareness that is your deepest nature. Share this with anyone who struggles with anxiety and doesn't know that scientifically validated approaches exist. Share it with anyone curious about how ancient Tibetan wisdom aligns with cutting-edge neuroscience. The 6-step practice that Harvard researched isn't just a technique. It's a doorway to transformation that has been waiting for you all along.